Well, thanks for everybody for coming today. The topic today is what is truth and can we know it? What is truth and can we know it? What is the nature of truth? When Pontius Pilate belched out thousands of years ago, what is truth? He didn't even wait around for an answer. His question implies that he gave up the search long ago. But such cynicism is not just an ancient phenomenon. The culture today says there is no truth, or that you have your truth and I have mine. Is truth just a matter of taste? Why believe anything at all? People believe things for sociological reasons, because our friends and parents believe it, or our culture says it. As good as it feels to be part of something bigger, they could be wrong. People believe things for psychological reasons, because it brings comfort or peace of mind, meaning, purpose, or hope. But psychological reasons don't necessarily make something true. Others believe something for religious purposes, because a pastor said it, a rabbi, a guru, an imam, or scripture said this. But they could be wrong. Some believe a system of thought, because it has a certain logic to it. It is consistent. It is coherent. But these don't necessarily make something true. We pay thousands of dollars to send children to universities to hear that there is no truth. No truth for me, no truth for you. And though this may be our culture, it's really not the way the world works. In fact, the term university is the combination of unity and diversity. The institutions of higher learning were founded on the common thread of truth in the diverse fields of knowledge, such as math, science, philosophy, etc. If there is no truth, why learn anything at all? Why listen to any professor? After all, professors don't have the truth, so why go? And moreover, why should we obey his prohibition to not cheat on an exam? But if Socrates said what he has said is true, that the unexamined life is not worth living, our very lives may depend upon knowing truth. And apathy about truth can be deadly. So let's come to terms with the terms. What is truth? Truth is telling it like it is. It describes an actual state of affairs. If something is true, it is true for all people, at all times, at all places. 2 plus 2 equals 4 anywhere in the world, at all times. All truth claims are exclusive, and they exclude their opposites. Another aspect of truth is that it is not determined, it is discovered. Truth is not determined, it is discovered. Truth is anterior, not invented. Truth is independent of anyone's knowledge. Even the scientific method is based on it. History, evidence, reality, facts, actuality, and absolutes are all closely related to truth. Now, truth has to be distinguished from beliefs. Beliefs change. Yet beliefs don't change truth no matter how sincerely they are held. For example, the world is not flat no matter how many people wanted to believe it. The earth has always revolved around the sun despite conventional thought for a geocentric universe. Truth is not affected by the attitude of the one professing or denying it. We conform to it. It does not conform to us. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not. You can believe everything to be true, but you cannot make everything true. Many beliefs today are not supported by evidence, but are subjective preferences. French mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote centuries ago, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. If one wants truth, he must be willing to give up subjective preferences in favor of objective facts discovered through logic, evidence, and science. Have you said the phrase lately? Oh, absolutely. Did you see the movie last week? Oh, absolutely. It was a great movie. Well, then you believe truth exists and are already using a primary law of logic by which we distinguish truth from error. How does one know truth? The process of discovering truth begins with first principles of logic that go back to the ancient Greeks and which we use today. They are called first principles because there is nothing else behind them. They are not proved by other principles, but are endemic in the nature of reality and are self-evident. They are the window and the glass by which we see and are not the things themselves that we see. We just know them, and we are hardwired by design to think this way, even if we are not conscious of it. We've all heard the phrase, all religions lead to the same place, right? Or all religions are the same, just with different terms or particulars. But is that true that all religions lead to the same place? Moral relativism has wreaked havoc on our ability to know truth. Now, going back to the ancient Greeks, there are three principles of logic which we all use today to determine truth. The first principle that is built into the nature of reality is called the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction. It is a first principle beyond which there is nothing else. And it helps us distinguish truth from error, good from evil, among other things, and we use it every day. The law of non-contradiction says that if something is true, its opposite cannot be. Something cannot be A and non-A at the same time and in the same way. By this, we can say that a woman is either pregnant or not pregnant. Two opposing truth claims cannot be both true at the same time and in the same way. There's a second law of logic that is the basis of Western thought, and this is called the law of the excluded middle. With this law, something is either this or it is that. One or the other. There is no middle ground. An example of the law of the excluded middle was affirmed by Jesus in the context of how the heart works when he said this in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And then there is one more law of logic called the law of identity. The law of identity. And this is where each thing has its own essence. Aristotle defined this law of identity this way. is a little bit of a tongue twister, so hang with me. To say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. While to say of what is that it is, and what of what is not that it is not, is true. So that he who says of anything that it is or that it is not will either say what is true or what is false. We might paraphrase it this way today. This is our modern term for it, our modern lingo. It is what it is, right? It is what it is. Law of identity. Now, these laws of thought guide us in how we distinguish things. And from these laws, we understand different truth claims of world religions. Now, we all heard the question, all religions lead to the same place. They just differ in their particulars, or in their peripheries. But that's not necessarily true. The way to answer that question, all religions lead to the same place, all religions are basically the same essence that just differ in the peripheries, is look at their major truth claims. Look at the core essence of what that religion is about, and you will see contradictions. They both can't be true. Christianity says that Jesus was the Son of God. He actually died on a cross and was risen from the dead, the resurrection. Islam says that Jesus was not God. He did not die on a cross. He was taken from it. And certainly there was no resurrection. So those both cannot be right. Either it happened or it didn't. And we can adjudicate that by other means, such as through the science of textual criticism or the historical method. There's another way of distinguishing these laws of logic. All religions are basically works-based systems where man has to do something to find favor with some metaphysical reality. That is in contradistinction to Christianity, which says it is only by grace, Ephesians 2:8 and 9, that you have been saved through faith. And this is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. It is the only religion that claims man cannot work his way to eternal favor with a deity, with a divine entity. He cannot do it. In Mormonism, observing repentance, baptism, church membership, a health code, and prayers for the dead are mandatory for salvation. Okay? In Catholicism, man does meritorious works as a precondition for God's grace in the 7 sacraments. In Islam, one must perform the 5 duties of the faith until the end to have any hope for salvation. And these 5 duties are saying the Shahada, which is the confession, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is a prophet of God. You have to pray 5 times a day, fasting, almsgiving, and the pilgrimage to Mecca, if at all possible. And even then, if you keep those, you're never quite sure. Hinduism incorporates the impersonal law of cause and effect, called karma. In karma, a person gets exactly what their actions merit and impacts the next life. If the rules are broken in this life, he may return as a far lower being, and there's absolutely no way of knowing what will happen in the next life. In Buddhism, one must adhere to the noble eightfold path to enlightenment. He must have the right view, the right intention, the right speech, the right action, the right livelihood, the right effort, the right mindfulness, the right concentration. problem with these are they could change. Who's to say what is right? In fact, Buddhism and all the strains of Buddhism are incredibly complex and confusing. And those rules seem to change. Whereas in Christianity, Isaiah 45:19 says, I, the Lord, speak the truth. I declare what is right. These three laws help us determine the law of singularity. And that is, in life, there is often one that is superior to all others. There is singularity in the universe. Just as there is one number one ranked tennis player in the world at a time. Or a spark plug always fires one way in an engine. Even though there may be many brands, there's oneness. All other religions employ works for salvation, save evangelical Christianity. Now, from these laws stem two theories of truth: the correspondence theory and the coherence theory. The correspondence theory says that truth is that which corresponds to reality. It is telling it like it is, what actually happened. Correspondence is fact-based, evidential, and correlates to what happened in history. The scientific method is based on correspondence, where truth is not something we invent, but discover. It is out there. The other theory of truth is called the coherence theory, and this says something is true only if it is internally logical, or it has consistent statements within. These statements connect like a web in space or like a suspended chain, where each link is dependent on the other to hold it together. There are degrees of truth, and any statement is only true to the extent it coheres with the system. There are no absolutes, but all truths are relative if each truth statement is dependent on the system. The problem with the coherence theory is that it becomes victim of circular reasoning, where the original premise may not be true. If truth is that which is absolute, then this theory is most certainly wrong. The system as a whole is not absolute because it depends on the coherence of all the contingent parts. The theory becomes susceptible to an infinite regress of ad hoc statements where each truth claim presupposes the other claim. Yet there is something that must be a bedrock first principle. It's like a chain that hangs suspended in the air by unsupported claims. There has to be a peg that holds that chain up. Even a spider web is attached to a wall. The best one can say is that this coheres better than that, but one can never say another coherent system is truly false. Now, applied to life or science, truth is tested by its correspondence to the evidence, or the correspondence theory. We don't use the coherence theory, in science, to test the validity of a truth claim, because truth is something we don't determine. It is discovered through data, through empirical means. Logic alone may miss the truth, but correspondence will discern it. Truth is something we discover. It is not something we determine, as I said. Now, let's illustrate the difference with a simple deduction of logic with a faulty premise. All men are four-legged reptiles. Zachary is a man. Therefore, Zachary is a four-legged reptile. Now, the coherence theory won't catch the error because it looks at logic alone once you're within. But by observation and more data through the empirical method, we can get more accurate information to revise the premise. With a different premise, we arrive at a different conclusion through logic. All men are two-legged mammals, which is observed. You get more data. Zachary is a man, observed. Therefore, Zachary is a two-legged mammal. So that's true. It has internal logic, but moreover, it is correspondent to reality, something out there. Now, even here, what we're looking for is reasonable certainty. Reasonable certainty. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt for a correct premise. We're not looking for 100% certainty, but a preponderance of the evidence. We haven't seen every man, right? Maybe there's one out there that violates this premise in the data. We just haven't seen them all. But we are reasonably certain that all, with the men we have seen, that they're all two-legged. And all of science works that way. Medicine, history, archaeology, our legal system, even the textual criticism of the New Testament. DNA, let's take DNA. In forensics, it is one of the most precise areas of science. But even forensics will not guarantee 100%. Every time you look at the data, they'll always say 99.98% certainty that this guy did it. This matches the profile, this DNA panel. So no scientist can observe every instance. There could be something out there that's missed that defied the odds. But this is how we learn. And this is how we go from the known to the unknown. Science doesn't need 100% certainty, but reasonable certainty. And that's how the world works. And truth is knowable even when we are not conscious of it. Now, one good example is the resurrection of Christ. People will ask, well, how do we know that happened? That was 2,000 years ago. It just so happens that through the science of textual criticism and independent eyewitness testimony in the historical method, the resurrection of Christ is the best attested event from antiquity. In fact, eyewitness testimony is still the primary form of evidence in civil and criminal law today. I know that firsthand because last year I was called for jury duty. And preparation for this, they gave us a tutorial video, And the last line of that tutorial said that eyewitness testimony is the primary form of evidence in criminal and civil law. That's amazing. And this is what we have 2,000 years ago. Very credible, independent eyewitness sources. Okay, that's great as far as it goes in our quest to know truth and how do we know it. But modern philosophy has jammed a stick into the spokes of our ability to know. And this has come by the means of two primary individuals, David Hume and Immanuel Kant. Hume is responsible for much of the skepticism and hyper-material emphasis of our day. As an empiricist, he believed that meaningful ideas must be based on sense experience. Since there are no sense experiences beyond the physical realm, any metaphysical statements about reality should not be believed. In fact, his philosophy contributed to the logical positivism of A.J. Ayer over 200 years later. You may know this principle, the principle of empirical verifiability. The major problem with his skepticism, where only those realities that are empirically verified are true, is that he wasn't skeptical about his truth claim. the claim that a statement must have empirical verifiability before it is meaningful is itself not empirically verifiable. He was using the immaterial laws of logic to say this. Interestingly, he also held that abstract reasoning, such as mathematics, could have meaningful statements. But again, he inches closer to the existence of the immaterial and assumes first principles. Now, in distinction to Hume, Immanuel Kant picked up where Leibniz and Spinoza left off in placing inordinate emphasis on the mind in determining reality, the mind. Now, Kant was a rationalist and believed all of reality could be reasoned to with the mind. Hume was not a rationalist and felt reality had to be evidenced in sensory experience. Now, Kant had a ravaging effect on our quest to know, the effect of which the average person suffers from today and doesn't even really know it. He is the father of modern agnosticism, where the mind becomes the focal sticking point in knowing reality. Traced back to the humanism of Descartes, remember his famous line, ergo cogito sum, I think, therefore I am. Starts with the mind. If he is right, then there's no way to know anything about the real world, and that goes for empirically verifiable things as well. Now, Kant said this, it is not about the thing itself. Kant said this, it is not about the thing itself. You only know the things to you after the mind forms them. A truck only appears the way it does because of how the mind forms it. You don't know the truck itself, only the phenomena the mind categorizes about the truck as it appears to you. But that leads to a question. Does the average person not know what he sees, but brilliant philosophers do? Because of men like Kant, C.S. Lewis wrote this. Good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. Kant's philosophy is bad philosophy because he put an unbridgeable gap between the real world and knowability about the real world. And he locked the uninitiated into complete agnosticism. In effect, Immanuel Kant assaults the law of identity that says each thing has its own essence. Why? Because we can't even know A in the first place. Or what A is. Can't even know the thing itself. But as you might have deduced, there are a number of fatal errors with his logic. First, we really do know the thing itself. With the truck, the mind doesn't mold the truck molds the mind. The wax doesn't impress the seal impresses the wax. So there's no gulf between the mind and the world. The mind is like the window through which we see, and not that at which we are looking. We don't look at the window. And we vindicate this every day. That truck you think you saw when you were crossing the road just breezes by, misses you. But if it did clip you, you would know. In fact, you probably wouldn't be here. If, as Kant says, we can't know anything about the real world, how do we know the real world is there? If you can't know anything, then Kant cannot claim to know anything either. Yet he claims to know something about the real world and that it is not knowable. He knows enough to know the real world is not knowable. But if it's not knowable, why should we trust his assessment? Right? Kant would have to go past all knowledge to come back and say that to us. But how can Kant even trust his mind to know that? He's using his mind, which is a thing in the real world, to know the real world is not knowable. But things in the real world, including his mind, he says cannot be known. How do you know where your mind ends and the real world begins? So as you can see, his claim is self-defeating, and he is not a complete agnostic, because he knows enough to use his mind and to say that. He's not a complete agnostic. But this philosophy has caused all kinds of anxiety and mental disorders with interpreting reality. To say that truth can't be known is self-refuting, because we have to know something in order to say that. Agnosticism is self-defeating when one says, I don't know, because this statement admits you know something. You know enough to say, I don't know. Okay, so you do know. You do know. Mortimer Adler corrected this Kantian gap of unknowability. He wrote, reality is independent of the mind. Truth and knowledge exist in the mind when the mind agrees with, conforms, or corresponds with independent reality. Truth and knowledge exist in the mind when the mind agrees with, conforms, or corresponds with independent reality. If David Hume said we don't know, Kant said we cannot know. And these have all contributed to what we know today as our modern form of relativism. Relativism. Relativism is where you have your truth, I have mine. What's true for you may not be true for me. There are some truths that are relative truths and some that are absolute. Relative truths are relative to time and space or to persons. Absolute truths are truths that are not only true to one time and place, but all times and all places. However, even relative truth claims can have an absolute aspect to them. For example, I might say, I feel warm in this room. That's a relative truth. And by the way, that's true. I feel really warm right now. Air conditioning must not be on in here. Not everyone feels warm, just me. I'm warm, he's hot, she's cold. It's relative. However, when the perspective of the speaker is understood as part of the context, you have an absolute aspect where you say, everyone needs to know that I feel warm in this room. So it becomes universal. But if relativism were true, I would have to be warm, hot, and cold all at the same time. So once fixed parameters are brought in, the meaning is understood and absolute truth does exist. Aha. Or take the statement, that dog is to the left of that tree. This is a relative statement because the dog is not to the right of the tree. However, that is not the final perspective. When the standpoint of the speaker is understood as part of the context, there is an element that is true for everyone, everywhere. Considering where I'm standing, that dog is to the left of that tree. But if relativism were true, that dog would have to be at all sides of the tree at the same time. So there is absolute truth if you see things from another perspective. Now, consider this. No relativist can say, this is absolutely true for me, because he is saying it absolutely. Affirming what he said does not exist. So he can't use the word absolutely. This is absolutely true for me. There is, however, one benefit to relativism in an illogical world, and that is you can never be wrong. Never wrong. If you can make truth relative, you're never wrong. You can convince yourself that you're right even when you're wrong. The downside is that without truth and the ability to distinguish difference, you'll never learn anything. You'll never go anywhere. The basis of learning is the ability to determine a false belief from a true one, which validates the laws of logic and the correspondence theory that we mentioned before. Science proves truth is absolute. Does that mean you have to have absolute evidence to believe in absolute truth? No. No. But truth is absolute whether we believe it or not. Known or not doesn't change the nature of truth, since truth is anterior. And as we mentioned, beliefs are different than truth. Beliefs are different than truth. So this concludes the first half of this discussion. Does anybody have any questions? We'll do the second half. Okay, sure.
So, you were talking about the perspective of truth. Truths are absolute. How about in a scientific, like the point of view, the theories about the beginning of the world, the universe?
Mm-hmm.
There's some have no evidence. It's just some doesn't have evidence, right? There's no evidence in this.
For what? There's no evidence for what?
In the beginning of the universe, or the beginning of, let's say, Earth, the creation.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what your question is.
The scientific community about the beginning or the origin of the world.
Yeah.
There's no evidence, or let's say concrete evidence.
Who says that? Everybody affirms there's evidence now. Everybody affirms there's evidence of the Big Bang. Who's saying there's no evidence for that? 100 years ago, they didn't believe that. They believed in an eternal universe. We have this term called the Big Bang. That's what we know this now.
So
so what's?
You would say it's concrete.
Yeah, everybody believes that.
So it's not.
Everybody believes there was a beginning, a point in time and space of all matter and energy, called the Big Bang. It doesn't mean they believe a God did it. They don't really know how it happened, but they all believe that.
And how about, let's say, the origin of life, like evolution? How do they? There's no evidence for it, right?
The origin of life?
I mean, evolution.
I don't know your question. You got to really clarify your questions, because I don't know what you're saying.
The evolution.
What about it? There's many types of evolution.
Theory, like macroevolution.
Okay. So the question is there evidence for evolution? Okay, so there seems to be, I don't know, I think you're asking this. I don't know what you're.
How do they establish